Senator Marcus Hale had spent 30 years building an empire, first in steel, then in politics. He had shaken hands with presidents, closed deals worth hundreds of millions, and never once questioned the path he'd chosen. But on the morning of his 62nd birthday, a single DNA test result would unravel everything he thought he knew about his life, revealing a truth that no amount of money or power could have prepared him for. The question wasn't whether he could handle the shock. The question was whether the woman on the other end of that revelation would ever want to know him at all. The morning light filtered through the tall windows of Marcus Hale's Georgetown townhouse, casting long golden rectangles across the hardwood floors. He stood at the kitchen island, pouring himself a cup of black coffee, the same Ethiopian blend he'd been drinking for 15 years, when his housekeeper, Dolores, set a small stack of mail beside his elbow. "Birthday cards," she said with a knowing smile. "Though I suspect most of them are from people hoping you'll remember them come campaign season." Marcus chuckled, the sound low and rumbling in his chest. At 62, he'd grown accustomed to the performative nature of political relationships. The cards would be embossed, expensive, filled with hollow well-wishes from lobbyists and donors who couldn't pick him out of a lineup without his name tag. But Dolores lingered, her weathered hands folded in front of her apron. "There's one at the bottom. No return address. Handwritten." Marcus raised an eyebrow. Handwritten letters were rare in his world. Everything came through official channels now. Emails, encrypted messages, carefully vetted correspondence screened by his staff. A handwritten letter with no return address should have been flagged and discarded. He set down his coffee and rifled through the stack until he found it. A plain white envelope, slightly creased at the corners, his name written in careful blue ink. The handwriting was feminine, deliberate, as if the sender had taken great care with each letter. He slid his thumb under the flap and pulled out a single sheet of paper. "Senator Hale, you don't know me, and I debated for months whether to write this letter at all, but I recently discovered something that I think you have a right to know, even if it changes nothing for either of us. 33 years ago, a woman named Emma Byrne worked as a secretary at Hale Steel in Pittsburgh. She was 24 years old, and she left the company suddenly in the spring of 1992. She never told anyone why. She was my mother. She passed away 3 years ago, and among her belongings I found letters, photographs, and a truth she had kept hidden her entire life. I took a DNA test through a genealogy service. The results confirmed what I had suspected. I am your daughter. I'm not writing to ask for anything. I don't want money. I don't want recognition. I don't even know if I want a relationship, but I thought you deserved to know that I exist. My name is Emma Byrne. I live in Ashford, Vermont. I'm a high school English teacher. I have a small house with a garden that never quite thrives no matter how much I talk to the tomatoes. If you want to reach me, you can. If you don't, I'll understand. Emma." Marcus read the letter 3 times. His hands, steady through countless board meetings and Senate floor debates, began to tremble. The name Emma Byrne surfaced from the murky depths of his memory like a photograph developing in solution. Soft features, auburn hair, a laugh that rang like wind chimes. He'd been 29 years old, already married to Patricia, his college sweetheart, though the marriage had been strained even then. Catherine had been his secretary for 18 months. She was kind, patient, and looked at him like he was something more than a balance sheet. They had had an affair. Brief, reckless, and devastating. When Patricia discovered it, she had given him an ultimatum: end it immediately or lose everything. His marriage, his reputation, his political aspirations that were just beginning to take shape. He'd chosen Patricia. He'd chosen ambition. Catherine had resigned without explanation the following week. He'd never heard from her again. He'd assumed she'd moved on, built a life somewhere far from Pittsburgh. He'd never known she was pregnant. Marcus lowered himself onto a kitchen stool, the letter trembling in his grip. Dolores watched him with quiet concern but didn't speak. She'd worked for him for 20 years. She knew when to wait. "Dolores," he said finally, his voice rough. "Cancel my appointments today." "All of them?" "All of them." That evening, Marcus sat alone in his study surrounded by the accumulated evidence of his success. Photographs with 3 different presidents lined the walls. Awards and commendations cluttered the shelves. A framed copy of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette from the day he sold Hale steel for $2.3 billion hung above the fireplace. None of it seemed to matter anymore. He'd spent the afternoon researching Emma Byrne. She existed. That much was easy to confirm. Her name appeared in the Ashford Valley High School faculty directory. She'd earned a master's degree in English literature from the University of Vermont. She'd published a handful of articles in small literary magazines. No social media presence. No public photographs beyond a grainy staff headshot on the school website. She was a ghost, or perhaps more accurately, she was someone who had chosen to live quietly, invisibly, in a world that increasingly demanded attention and noise. Marcus pulled up the DNA genealogy service on his laptop. He'd submitted his own sample 3 years ago at the urging of his communications director, who thought it might make for good, relatable content during his last campaign. The results had been unremarkable. Scottish and Irish ancestry, a distant connection to some minor historical figure no one remembered. But now, logged into his account, he saw something new in his notifications. Close family match. Emma C. Byrne. Relationship? Parent-child. The algorithm didn't lie. He had a daughter. A 33-year-old woman who taught high school English in a small Vermont town, who grew tomatoes that wouldn't thrive, who had written him the most honest letter he'd received in decades, and he had no idea what to do about it. 3 days passed before Marcus found the courage to write back. His first draft was formal, senatorial, the kind of letter his staff would approve. He deleted it. His second draft was emotional, rambling, filled with apologies that felt hollow even as he typed them. He deleted that too. The third draft was simple. Emma, thank you for your letter. I don't have the right words yet, but I want to find them. I remember your mother. She was kind and patient and deserved far better than what I gave her. I'm sorry I never knew about you. I'm sorry she had to carry that alone. I would very much like to meet you if you're willing, but I understand if you're not. You mentioned your garden. My late mother used to say that tomatoes need someone to believe in them. She was probably wrong, but she grew the best tomatoes in Pennsylvania. Marcus. He mailed the letter himself, walking 3 blocks to a public mailbox so that no one on his staff would see it. The November wind bit at his cheeks, but he barely noticed. For the first time in years, something felt real. 2 weeks later, a response arrived. Marcus. My mother never stopped believing in things. She believed in second chances, in quiet kindness, and the idea that people could change if they wanted it badly enough. I think she believed in you, even after everything. I'm not sure what I believe yet, but I'm willing to find out. There's a coffee shop in Ashford called The Roasted Leaf. I'll be there this Saturday at 10 a.m. if you want to come. No pressure, no expectations. Emma. P.S. I'm trying eggshells around the tomatoes next spring. Apparently calcium helps. We'll see. Marcus smiled despite himself. He read the letter 4 times, then reached for his phone and cleared his schedule for Saturday. Whatever came next, he was going to that coffee shop. He owed Catherine that much. He owed Emma more.
But what Marcus didn't know was that his arrival in Ashford would set off a chain of events that neither of them could have predicted, because someone else had been watching Emma Byrne for a very long time.
Ashford, Vermont was the kind of town that appeared on postcards but rarely on maps. Nestled in a valley between two gentle ridges, it had a population of 4,000 and a main street that could be walked end to end in 7 minutes. The Roasted Leaf sat at the corner of Main and Elm, its windows fogged with steam, the scent of fresh-baked cinnamon rolls drifting onto the sidewalk. Marcus arrived at 9:47 a.m., 13 minutes early. He'd driven himself, no driver, no security detail, in a rented sedan that felt foreign after years of town cars and motorcades. The anonymity was strange and exhilarating, like stepping into someone else's life. He pushed open the coffee shop door, and a small bell chimed overhead. The interior was warm and cluttered in the way that independent coffee shops always seem to be. Mismatched chairs, local artwork on the walls, a chalkboard menu written in careful script. A fire crackled in a stone hearth near the back. The air smelled of coffee and something sweeter beneath it, like brown sugar and vanilla. Marcus ordered a black coffee and chose a table near the window, positioning himself so he could watch the door. His hands wrapped around the ceramic mug, absorbing its heat. He'd rehearsed what he might say 100 times on the drive up. Every version sounded wrong. At exactly 10 a.m., the door opened. She was smaller than he'd expected, 5'4" at most, with auburn hair pulled back in a loose ponytail and a navy peacoat buttoned against the cold. Her features were her mother's, the gentle slope of her nose, the fullness of her lips, the way her eyes crinkled slightly at the corners even when she wasn't smiling. But her eyes were his, gray-green, sharp, observant. The eyes that had stared back at him from every mirror for 62 years. Emma scanned the room, spotted him, and paused. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then she crossed to his table, her boots clicking softly on the hardwood floor, and sat down across from him. "You came," she said. Her voice was steady, but he caught the slight tremor beneath it. "I came," he agreed. "I almost turned around 3 times on the drive up." "Why didn't you?" "Because I've spent 33 years not knowing you existed. I didn't want to spend another day wondering." Emma studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she reached across the table and poured a packet of sugar into his coffee without asking. "My mother used to say you took your coffee black, but secretly wished you didn't." Marcus blinked. She remembered that? She remembered everything about you. Emma's voice softened. She just chose not to talk about it. They talked for 3 hours. Not about the big things. Not yet. Those conversations would come later, heavy and necessary, like debts that needed paying. Instead, they talked about small things, safe things. Emma told him about her students, the ones who struggled with Shakespeare and the ones who fell in love with it. She told him about her house, a century-old Victorian with creaky floors and a kitchen that flooded every spring. She told him about her best friend Rosa, who ran the flower shop next door and had a habit of leaving unsolicited bouquets on her porch. Marcus told him about the tomato plants his mother had grown in their backyard in Pittsburgh, how she'd talk to them every morning like they were children. He told him about the early days of Hale Steel, when he'd worked 18-hour shifts and eaten dinner standing up because there wasn't time to sit. He told him about his late wife, Patricia, who had passed 5 years ago, a heart attack, sudden and merciless, and how the silence of his house still caught him off guard. He did not tell her about the affair. Not yet. That wound was too raw, too complicated for a first conversation. But Emma seemed to understand. "My mother never told me who my father was," she said quietly, wrapping her hands around her own mug. "She said it didn't matter. She said the only thing that mattered was that she loved me, and that was enough." Was it?
Emma hesitated. "I thought so. For a long time, I thought so." She looked up, meeting his eyes. But then she got sick. Pancreatic cancer. Fast and brutal. And in those last weeks, she started talking about things she'd never mentioned before. Letters she'd kept. A man she'd loved who didn't love her back. A choice she'd made to protect me from something she never named. Marcus felt the weight of those words settle in his chest like a stone. "She was protecting you from me," he said. It wasn't a question. "I think she was protecting both of us." Emma's voice was steady, but her eyes glistened. "She knew who you were. She followed your career, your campaigns. She kept a scrapbook, newspaper clippings, magazine articles. She never told me why." "Did you find it, the scrapbook?" "I burned it." Emma's jaw tightened. "After she died, I found it in her closet. I didn't understand it first, and then I did, and I was so angry at her, at you, at the whole unfair mess of it that I threw it in the fireplace and watched it turn to ash." Marcus said nothing. There was nothing to say. "I regret it now," Emma admitted. "It was the only thing I had of her that was real, the only proof that she had loved someone other than me, and I destroyed it because I was too scared to sit with what it meant." She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a photograph, creased, faded, but intact. "This is the only one I kept." She slid it across the table. Marcus looked down and felt the air leave his lungs. It was a photograph of Catherine, young and radiant, standing in front of the Hale Steel offices. She was smiling at someone off camera, her hand resting on the curve of her belly. She'd been pregnant, and she'd been happy. Marcus drove back to Washington that evening, but his mind stayed in Ashford. He replayed every moment of the conversation, every shift in Emma's expression, every word she'd chosen and every word she hadn't. She was guarded, which he understood. She was angry, which he deserved. But beneath the caution and the hurt, there was something else, a flicker of curiosity, maybe even hope. She'd agreed to meet him again. Next Saturday, same place, same time. She'd made no promises beyond that. It was more than he had any right to expect. But Marcus wasn't the only one watching Emma Byrne. Across the street from the Roasted Leaf, a man in a gray sedan had been parked since 9:30 a.m. He'd photographed Marcus entering the coffee shop, photographed him sitting with Emma, photographed them talking for 3 hours like two people trying to rebuild a bridge that had burned 30 years ago. The man's name was Derek Vance. He worked for a political consulting firm that specialized in opposition research, the kind of work that never made headlines but decided elections. And Derek Vance had just discovered that Senator Marcus Hale, the frontrunner for his party's presidential nomination, had a secret daughter he'd never publicly acknowledged. In politics, secrets were currency, and Derek Vance had just struck gold. What Marcus didn't realize was that his newfound connection with Emma had already been noticed by people who would do anything to use it against him, and the first move was already being planned.
The story broke on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after Marcus's first meeting with Emma. He was in his Senate office reviewing a bill on infrastructure spending when his chief of staff, Linda Chen, burst through the door without knocking. Her face was pale, her phone clutched in her hand like a weapon. "We have a problem," she said. Marcus looked up. In 20 years of working together, Linda had never entered his office without knocking. "What kind of problem?" She handed him her phone. The screen displayed a news article from a political gossip site, the kind of outlet that traded in scandal and innuendo, the kind that serious journalists dismissed but millions of voters read. Exclusive: Senator Marcus Hale's secret love child, the woman he hid for 33 years. The photograph beneath the headline was the one Derek Vance had taken outside the Roasted Leaf. Marcus and Emma, sitting across from each other, their expressions caught mid-conversation. Marcus read the article in silence. It was worse than he'd expected. The writer had done their homework, or rather, someone had done it for them. They knew about Catherine Byrne. They knew about the affair. They knew about Emma's job, her address, the name of her coffee shop. They'd even found the DNA match.
How? Marcus asked, his voice flat. We don't know yet. Could be a leak from the genealogy service, could be someone on your staff. Linda's jaw tightened. Or it could be opposition research. You announced your exploratory committee last month. Someone's already playing hardball. Marcus set the phone down on his desk. The headline stared up at him, accusing. Has Emma seen this? I don't know, but if she hasn't, she will soon. This is everywhere. Twitter, Facebook, every cable news channel. They're already camped outside her school. Marcus stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Get me a car. Now. He drove to Ashford without stopping, without calling ahead. The roads blurred beneath him, autumn trees giving way to the rolling hills of Vermont. He didn't know what he would say when he got there. He only knew that Emma shouldn't have to face this alone. He arrived at Ashford Valley High School just after 2 p.m. The parking lot was chaos. News vans, reporters with cameras, local police trying to maintain order. A crowd of curious onlookers had gathered near the entrance, their phones raised like shields. Marcus parked at the edge of the lot and approached on foot. A reporter spotted him immediately. Senator Hale! Can you confirm that Emma Byrne is your biological daughter? Senator, did you know about her when you married your wife? How long have you been hiding this? He ignored them all, pushing through the crowd toward the main entrance. A police officer stepped forward to block his path, but something in Marcus's expression made the men hesitate. I'm here to see Emma Byrne. Please. The officer studied him for a long moment, then nodded and stepped aside. He found Emma in her classroom, sitting at her desk with her head in her hands. The room was empty. Her students had been dismissed early, sent home to avoid the spectacle. Posters of literary quotes lined the walls. Fitzgerald, Morrison, Austen. A well-loved copy of Pride and Prejudice sat open on her desk, its pages soft with use. She looked up when he entered. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her face pale. You shouldn't be here, she said. Neither should you, but here we are. He crossed the room and sat in one of the students' desks across from her. The chair was too small for him, and he felt absurdly out of place, a senator in a teenager's seat, facing a daughter he barely knew. I didn't leak it. I need you to know that. I know. Emma's voice was hollow. I know you didn't. How do you know? Because if you'd wanted to use me, you would have done it differently. You would have staged a reunion, brought cameras, made it look like a heartwarming story of redemption. She laughed bitterly. You're a politician. You know how this works. I didn't want any of this. I know. But that doesn't change the fact that it's happening. They sat in silence for a moment. Outside, the noise of the crowd swelled and faded like waves. My students saw the article, Emma said quietly. Some of them showed it to me on their phones before I'd even finished first period. They didn't know what to say. Neither did I. What did you tell them? That sometimes adults make mistakes, and sometimes those mistakes have consequences that last longer than anyone expects. She paused. And that the truth isn't always simple, even when it should be. Marcus felt something crack in his chest. I'm sorry, he said. The words felt inadequate, like trying to put out a fire with a thimble of water. Which part are you sorry for? Emma's voice sharpened. The affair? The abandonment? Or just the inconvenient timing?
All of it. He leaned forward, his elbows on the small desk. I could make excuses. I could tell you that I was young and ambitious and terrified of losing everything I'd worked for. But none of that matters now. What matters is that you exist, and I missed 33 years of your life, and I can never get that back." Emma stared at him for a long moment. "My mother used to say that regret is just guilt without the courage to apologize." She was right. She usually was. Emma sighed and rubbed her eyes. "So what happens now? Your people manage the story, spin it into something palatable, and I become a footnote in your campaign narrative?" "No." Marcus's voice was firm. "That's not what happens." "Then what?" He hesitated. What he was about to say would change everything, not just for Emma, but for his career, his legacy, his entire political future. But sitting in this classroom surrounded by books and the quiet artifacts of a teacher's life, he realized that none of that mattered anymore. "I'm going to tell the truth," he said. "All of it. The affair, the choices I made, the fact that I abandoned your mother when she needed me most. I'm going to stand in front of the cameras and take responsibility for every mistake I've made." Emma's eyes widened. "That will destroy you." "Maybe," he shrugged, "but I spent 30 years building a career on the idea that honesty matters. If I can't be honest about my own life, what's the point of any of it?" The press conference took place 2 days later, on the steps of the Capitol. Marcus stood behind a podium, flanked by Linda Chen and 2 other senior staffers who had begged him not to do this. The crowd of reporters was larger than any he'd faced in his career. Hundreds of cameras, thousands of voices shouting questions he couldn't hear. He raised his hand, and the noise subsided. "33 years ago," he began, "I made a choice that I have regretted every day since. I had an affair with a woman named Catherine Byrne. When she became pregnant, I didn't know. When she left, I didn't ask why. I was too consumed with protecting my own career to consider what my actions had cost someone else." The crowd was silent. Even the cameras seemed to still. That woman raised a daughter alone. Her name is Emma. She is a high school English teacher in Vermont. She is kind and thoughtful and braver than I will ever be. She wrote me a letter 3 months ago, and in that letter she gave me a gift I did not deserve, the chance to know her. Marcus paused, his throat tight. "I am not here to ask for forgiveness. I am not here to salvage my political career. I am here because the truth matters more than convenience, and because my daughter deserves to be known for who she is, not as a scandal, not as opposition research, but as a person." He looked directly into the cameras. "Emma, if you're watching this, I'm sorry. Not for the attention, not for the headlines. I'm sorry for the years I wasn't there. I'm sorry for every school play I missed, every birthday I didn't know about, every moment when you needed a father and had to face the world alone. I can't change the past, but I can promise you this. I'm not going anywhere. Not anymore." The questions erupted all at once, a tidal wave of noise that crashed against him. He answered none of them. He simply walked away. What Marcus didn't expect was the response waiting for him, a text message from Emma that would change everything once more. All of it. He leaned forward, his elbows on the small desk. "I could make excuses, I could tell you that I was young and ambitious and terrified of losing everything I'd worked for, but none of that matters now. What matters is that you exist, and I missed 33 years of your life, and I can never get that back." Emma stared at him for a long moment. "My mother used to say that regret is just guilt without the courage to apologize." She was right. She usually was. Emma sighed and rubbed her eyes. "So what happens now? Your people manage the story, spin it into something palatable, and I become a footnote in your campaign narrative?" "No." Marcus's voice was firm. "That's not what happens." "Then what?" He hesitated. What he was about to say would change everything, not just for Emma, but for his career, his legacy, his entire political future. But sitting in this classroom surrounded by books and the quiet artifacts of a teacher's life, he realized that none of that mattered anymore. "I'm going to tell the truth," he said. "All of it. The affair, the choices I made, the fact that I abandoned your mother when she needed me most. I'm going to stand in front of the cameras and take responsibility for every mistake I've made." Emma's eyes widened. "That will destroy you." "Maybe," he shrugged, "but I spent 30 years building a career on the idea that honesty matters. If I can't be honest about my own life, what's the point of any of it?" The press conference took place 2 days later, on the steps of the Capitol. Marcus stood behind a podium, flanked by Linda Chen and 2 other senior staffers who had begged him not to do this. The crowd of reporters was larger than any he'd faced in his career. Hundreds of cameras, thousands of voices shouting questions he couldn't hear. He raised his hand, and the noise subsided. 33 years ago, he began, "I made a choice that I have regretted every day since. I had an affair with a woman named Catherine Byrne. When she became pregnant, I didn't know. When she left, I didn't ask why. I was too consumed with protecting my own career to consider what my actions had cost someone else." The crowd was silent. Even the cameras seemed to still. That woman raised a daughter alone. Her name is Emma. She is a high school English teacher in Vermont. She is kind and thoughtful and braver than I will ever be. She wrote me a letter 3 months ago, and in that letter she gave me a gift I did not deserve, the chance to know her. Marcus paused, his throat tight. "I am not here to ask for forgiveness. I am not here to salvage my political career. I am here because the truth matters more than convenience, and because my daughter deserves to be known for who she is, not as a scandal, not as opposition research, but as a person." He looked directly into the cameras. "Emma, if you're watching this, I'm sorry. Not for the attention, not for the headlines. I'm sorry for the years I wasn't there. I'm sorry for every school play I missed, every birthday I didn't know about, every moment when you needed a father and had to face the world alone. I can't change the past, but I can promise you this. I'm not going anywhere. Not anymore." The questions erupted all at once, a tidal wave of noise that crashed against him. He answered none of them. He simply walked away. What Marcus didn't expect was the response waiting for him, a text message from Emma that would change everything once more.
Emma watched the press conference from her living room, curled on her grandmother's old quilt. Rosa sitting beside her with a box of tissues and a bottle of wine neither of them had opened. She hadn't expected to cry. She'd spent 3 weeks bracing herself for impact, building walls, preparing for the inevitable disappointment. Politicians were performers, she'd told herself. Whatever Marcus Hale said on those steps would be calculated, focus-grouped, designed for maximum sympathy. But watching him stand there, alone, exposed, owning every mistake without excuses, she felt something shift inside her. A door she'd kept locked for years creaked open just a fraction of an inch. "That was real," Rosa said quietly. "I've seen enough fake apologies to know the difference. That was real." Emma didn't answer. She picked up her phone and typed a message with trembling fingers. "Thank you. Not for the apology. For the truth." She hit send before she could talk herself out of it. The weeks that followed were strange and disorienting, like walking through a house where all the furniture had been moved. The media frenzy eventually subsided, replaced by newer scandals and fresher outrage. Marcus's approval ratings took a hit, but not the catastrophic collapse his advisors had predicted. It turned out that voters, exhausted by polished insincerity, had an appetite for raw honesty, even when that honesty was uncomfortable. He didn't announce his presidential exploratory committee. He didn't return to his usual routine of fundraisers and strategy meetings. Instead, he did something that shocked everyone who knew him. He took a leave of absence. "I need time," he told Linda when she demanded an explanation. "I've spent 40 years putting my career first. I think I've earned a few months to figure out what else matters." He rented a small cabin outside Ashford, 20 minutes from Emma's house. It was modest by any standards: 2 rooms, a wood stove, a porch that looked out over a meadow dotted with late autumn wildflowers. He bought groceries at the local market, cooked meals he'd never learned to make, and discovered that silence could be a gift rather than a punishment. Emma visited on Sundays. Their conversations were careful at first, circling each other like cautious animals. They talked about books, Emma's passion, and one Marcus had neglected for decades. She lent him her copy of East of Eden, and he stayed up until 3 a.m. finishing it, underlining passages that felt like they'd been written specifically for him. "And now that you don't have to be perfect, you can be good." He read that line 4 times. By December, the visits had become longer. Emma would arrive with coffee and pastries from the roasted leaf, and they would sit on Marcus's porch wrapped in blankets, watching the snow settle on the meadow. "Tell me about her," Marcus said one afternoon. "Your mother, the parts I don't know." Emma was quiet for a moment, her breath misting in the cold air. "She was stubborn," she said finally, "the most stubborn person I've ever known. When she decided something, that was it. No arguments, no compromises. She decided she was going to raise me alone, and she did. She decided she wasn't going to let the past define her, and she didn't." "Did she ever talk about me?" "No, not directly." Emma pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "But sometimes, when she thought I wasn't looking, she'd get this expression, like she was remembering something bittersweet. I'd catch her staring at old photographs or pausing in the middle of a sentence, and I knew she was somewhere else. Somewhere I couldn't follow." Marcus absorbed this in silence. "She never remarried?" "She dated a few times. There was a man named Paul when I was 12, a widower with 2 sons. I thought for sure they'd end up together, but she broke it off after 6 months. She told me she'd already given her heart away once, and she wasn't sure she had enough left to do it again." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. She was happy, in her own way. She had me, she had her garden, she had her books. She said that was enough." "Was it for you?" "Was what?" "Was it enough? The career, the power, the legacy everyone talks about?" Marcus considered the question. A month ago, he would have said yes. He would have listed his accomplishments, his influence, the bills he'd passed, and the lives he'd affected. But sitting on this porch, watching snow fall on a meadow he'd never known existed, he realized the truth was more complicated. He thought it was, he told himself it was, but there were moments, late at night or early in the morning when the house was too quiet, when I'd wonder what I'd missed. Patricia and I never had children. We talked about it once, early on, but she wasn't sure, and I was too focused on work to push the issue. And then the years went by, and the question just faded. Do you regret that? I regret not asking the question more often. I regret assuming there would always be time. I looked at Emma. Finding out about you, it felt like a second chance I hadn't earned, like the universe had decided to give me a gift I didn't deserve. Emma's expression softened. My mother used to say that gifts aren't about deserving. They're about grace. Christmas arrived with a snowstorm that buried Ashford under 2 feet of powder.
Emma had planned to spend the holiday alone. She'd done it for the past 3 years, ever since her mother's passing, but Rosa had other ideas. She appeared on Emma's doorstep at 8 a.m. on Christmas morning, carrying a casserole dish and a determined expression. "You're not spending another Christmas eating soup from a can and watching sad movies," Rosa declared. "I've invited Marcus, and we're doing this properly." Emma blinked. "You invited Marcus?" "Someone had to. The man's been living in that cabin for 2 months, and I doubt he knows how to roast a turkey." Rosa set the casserole on the kitchen counter and began opening cabinets. "Where's your good tablecloth? The one with the embroidered edges?" "Rosa! Don't Rosa me. Family is family, even when it's complicated, especially when it's complicated. Now go put on something festive. He'll be here in an hour." Marcus arrived at 10 a.m., carrying a bottle of wine he'd agonized over for 30 minutes at the liquor store, and a small wrapped package he'd ordered 3 weeks ago. Emma opened the door. And for a moment, neither of them spoke. She was wearing a green sweater with tiny embroidered holly leaves, festive, as Rosa had demanded, and her hair was down, falling soft around her shoulders. Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas. She stepped aside to let him in, and he crossed the threshold into a house that smelled of cinnamon and roasting meat and something else beneath it. Home, he realized. The ineffable scent of home. The table was set for 3 with Emma's grandmother's china and candles that flickered in the gray winter light. Rosa bustled in the kitchen, issuing orders neither of them dared to contradict. Outside, the snow continued to fall, muffling the world in white silence. They ate too much, they talked too long. Rosa told stories about Emma's childhood that made her blush and protest and laugh despite herself. Marcus shared memories of Pittsburgh winters, of his mother's ham, of the year his father had dressed as Santa and fooled absolutely no one. When the meal was finished and the dishes were cleared, Marcus handed Emma the package he'd been carrying. "It's not much, but I wanted you to have it." Emma unwrapped it carefully, her fingers working at the tape with deliberate patience. Inside was a leather-bound journal, its cover embossed with a simple design, a tomato vine curling across the spine. "For your garden notes. I thought maybe if you wrote down what works and what doesn't, next year's crop might actually thrive." Emma stared at the journal for a long moment. Then she looked up and her eyes were bright with tears. "My mother kept a journal just like this. She wrote in it every day until she couldn't anymore." "I know." Marcus's voice was quiet. "I found one like it in an antique shop last month. The owner said the design was popular in the 1990s. I hoped." He trailed off, uncertain. Emma set the journal on the table and stood. For a heartbeat, Marcus didn't know what she was going to do. Then she crossed the room and hugged him. It was the first time she'd initiated physical contact, the first time she'd reached for him instead of waiting. Her arms wrapped around his shoulders, her cheek pressed against his chest, and Marcus felt something inside him break open like a seed splitting its shell. He hugged her back and didn't let go. "Thank you," she whispered, "for coming, for staying, for all of it. Thank you for letting me." They stood like that for a long moment, 2 strangers who were learning to be family, while the snow fell softly outside and Rosa pretended not to watch from the kitchen doorway. But as the new year approached, Marcus would face a choice that would test everything he'd built with Emma and force both of them to decide what kind of future they truly wanted.
January brought a thaw, both literal and figurative. The snow melted slowly, revealing patches of brown grass and the skeletal outlines of Emma's dormant garden. Marcus had extended his cabin rental through the spring, a decision that raised eyebrows in Washington but felt entirely right to him. He'd begun writing, not speeches or policy briefs, but something more personal. A memoir, perhaps, or maybe just a long letter to Emma, explaining all the things he'd never been able to say out loud. He hadn't decided yet. What he had decided was that his political career, as he'd known it, was over. Not because of the scandal, the headlines had faded, replaced by newer controversies, but because the hunger that had driven him for 40 years had finally quieted. He didn't want power anymore. He wanted presence. He wanted to be here, in this small Vermont town, watching his daughter's garden grow. On the first day of February, Linda Chen drove up from Washington. She found Marcus on his cabin porch, wrapped in a flannel blanket, reading a novel Emma had recommended. He looked different than she remembered, softer somehow, the hard edges worn smooth by time and solitude. "You look like you've joined a commune," she said. "Just a reading group." Marcus set down the book and gestured to the empty chair beside him. "Sit. Tell me what crisis brought you 8 hours north." Linda sat, her designer coat incongruous against the rustic wood. "The party wants you back. They're prepared to overlook the situation if you announce by March." "Overlook my daughter, you mean?" "Marcus, her name is Emma. She's a high school English teacher. She makes the best apple crisp I've ever tasted." He met Linda's eyes.
She's not a situation to be overlooked. I know. I'm not asking you to pretend she doesn't exist. I'm asking you to consider whether walking away from everything you've built is really what you want. I've considered it every day for 3 months. Marcus looked out at the meadow where a cardinal had landed on a bare branch, its red feathers vivid against the gray sky. Do you know what I've realized? Tell me. I've spent my entire life trying to build something that would outlast me. A legacy, a name, something people would remember. He paused. But legacies are just stories other people tell. They're not real. What's real is this: sitting on a porch in Vermont, watching a bird, knowing that somewhere down the road my daughter is grading papers and talking to tomato seedlings that won't sprout for another 2 months. Linda was quiet for a long moment. "You're really not coming back," she said. It wasn't a question. "I'm really not." She stood, brushing imaginary dust from her coat. "Then I suppose this is goodbye, at least professionally." Marcus stood too and extended his hand. "Thank you, Linda, for 20 years of keeping me organized. I couldn't have done any of it without you." She shook his hand, her grip firm and familiar. "You could have. You just would have done it worse." He laughed, a real laugh, the kind that had been rare for most of his adult life. "Take care of yourself, Marcus." Linda turned toward her car, then paused. "And take care of her. She seems worth it." "She is." Spring arrived slowly, like a shy guest unsure of its welcome. The snow retreated, the meadow turned green. Emma's garden, fortified with eggshells and optimism, began to show signs of life. Tiny green shoots pushing through the dark soil, fragile and determined. Marcus spent most mornings helping her tend it. He'd never gardened before, had never seen the point of coaxing things from the earth when you could simply buy them at a store. But there was something meditative about the work. The smell of turned soil, the feel of roots between his fingers, the patience required to nurture something you couldn't control. "You're getting better at this," Emma said one morning, watching him stake a tomato plant with careful precision. "I had a good teacher." Flattery will get you nowhere, but she was smiling. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, the sun warm on their shoulders, birdsong drifting from the trees at the edge of the meadow. "I've been thinking," Emma said eventually. About what comes next, for both of us." She straightened, wiping her hands on her jeans. "You've been here for 5 months. That cabin isn't cheap, and I know you've been paying for it yourself. That's not the point." She hesitated. "The point is, there's a house for sale 2 streets over. It's been on the market for a year because the foundation needs work and the roof leaks, but it has a big yard and a view of the mountains, and the owner would probably take any reasonable offer." Marcus looked at her. "Are you suggesting I buy a house in Ashford?" "I'm suggesting you consider it." Emma's voice was careful, measured. "I'm not asking you to stay forever. I'm not asking you to give up your life in Washington. I'm just saying, if you wanted to be closer, there's a way." Marcus felt the words settle into him like seeds into soil. "I'll look at it. This afternoon." He bought the house 3 weeks later.
It was smaller than any home he'd ever owned. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen with outdated appliances, a porch that sagged slightly on the left side. The foundation did need work, and the roof did leak, and the previous owner had painted the bathroom an unfortunate shade of mustard yellow. But it had a yard big enough for a garden, and a view of the mountains that turned gold at sunset, and it was 7 minutes from Emma's door. He moved in on the 1st of May. The housewarming party was Emma's idea, though party was a generous term. It was really just the 3 of them, Marcus, Emma, and Rosa, sitting on the new porch furniture Marcus had ordered online, eating pizza from the only delivery place in town, and drinking wine from mismatched glasses. "To new beginnings," Rosa said, raising her glass. "To family," Emma added, her eyes meeting Marcus's.
To tomatoes that actually grow this year, Marcus finished. They clinked glasses and drank. Later, after Rosa had gone home and the pizza boxes had been cleared away, Emma and Marcus sat alone on the porch, watching the stars emerge one by one. "I have something for you," Emma said. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small object wrapped in tissue paper. "I've been holding on to it since January. I wasn't sure when the right time would be." Marcus unwrapped it carefully. It was a photograph, old, faded, preserved in a simple wooden frame. The image showed a young woman with auburn hair and a gentle smile standing in front of a garden in full bloom. Tomatoes hung heavy on the vine behind her, their red skins bright against the green leaves. "That's my mother," Emma said, "the summer before she got sick. She grew the best tomatoes in Vermont that year. Talked to them every single day." Marcus stared at the photograph, at the woman he'd known for 18 months and thought about for 33 years. "Why are you giving this to me?" "Because she would have wanted you to have it," Emma said. Her voice was steady. She never stopped believing that people could change. She never stopped believing in second chances. And I think she would have been glad to know that her daughter found her father, even if it took too long. Marcus held the photograph like it was made of glass. "Thank you," he said. The words felt insufficient, but Emma seemed to understand. They sat in silence for a while, the night wrapping around them like a blanket. "I'm glad you came to the coffee shop," Emma said. "So am I." "I'm glad you stayed." Marcus turned to look at her, this woman who had been a stranger 6 months ago and now the most important person in his world. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. "Not anymore." Emma reached over and took his hand. Her grip was warm and certain. They sat like that until the stars began to fade and the first pale light of dawn touched the mountains. Two people who had been lost, now found, two halves of a story that had finally come together. The tomatoes would grow that summer, fat and red and abundant. The house would be repaired, the roof patched, the bathroom painted a reasonable shade of blue. Emma would continue teaching, Marcus would continue writing, and Rosa would continue leaving unsolicited bouquets on both their porches. And every Sunday, without fail, they would gather in Emma's kitchen to share a meal and talk about everything and nothing. A father and daughter learning, slowly and imperfectly, how to be family. It wasn't the legacy Marcus had imagined for himself. It was better.